Welcome to Discover Midwives, the podcast where we explore the art, science, and impact of midwifery. I'm Jessica Brumley, and each episode we'll uncover the stories, the history, and the expertise of midwives. This is your space to learn, connect, and celebrate the power of midwifery. Let's discover midwives together. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. This is Discover Midwives, a podcast created to help you understand your options for healthcare across the lifespan, from routine gynecologic care and contraception to pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and beyond, without fear, pressure, or medical jargon. In my work as a midwife, I meet people every day who are trying to make thoughtful decisions in a healthcare system that often feels rushed, confusing, or overwhelming. This podcast exists to slow things down, answer real questions, and center what matters most: your body, your voice, and your right to respectful, informed care. Whether you're pregnant, planning a pregnancy, seeking ongoing gynecologic care, supporting someone you love, or simply curious about midwifery, you belong here. On today's episode, we are featuring Dr. Cecilia Jevitt. Dr. Jevitt is a certified nurse midwife with a PhD. She's been a practicing midwife and educator for many decades, I'll say that. Her research has centered around nutrition, exercise, and weight gain in pregnancy. Let's talk about what it really means, what you deserve to know, and how it might show up in your own care. So let's get started. Dr. Jevitt, welcome.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you. Thank you.
First, I just want to say thank you for joining this podcast as our first guest, and really, longtime friend and mentor of mine. And so it's really just a privilege and an honor to have you join me today. And I know your history, but I figured it would be helpful for our listeners to hear a bit about how you even became interested in this topic.
Well, how did I get interested in nutrition during pregnancy? I don't honestly remember, except that when I was a new midwife, there was a physician, Tom Brewer. And why am I remembering that name like almost 50 years later? And he had an organization called SPUN, Society for the Protection of the Unborn Through Nutrition. And he talked about the importance of healthy eating during pregnancy. But, I read his work. It wasn't as if I really followed that organization. But what I came to realize during years of teaching midwifery was that the textbooks looked at how to help medical problems, how to look for them, how to treat infections and high blood pressure, when the textbooks didn't have very much about eating during pregnancy, and they still don't. And to me, medicine is food. A lot of my students want to learn about traditional herbal medicines. And I think what we've forgotten is that a lot of our everyday cuisine, onions, garlic, parsley, cilantro, those are traditional herbs that actually prime our immune system. They're good for those bazillions of little bacteria in our gut microbiome. And we're always looking for the exotic instead of thinking our day-to-day eating is really important to our health. And we have just, even in the last 10 years, learned so much about our eating. I just talked about our microbiome. When I was a new midwife, we thought of the body as mostly a sterile cavity on the inside. And it's not. And now I talk about my little interior garden, my little gut microbiome. And we can actually help our digestion by giving that microbiome foods that they like to eat, fruits and vegetables, just what everybody keeps preaching for us to eat. And we've learned that the little bacteria in the microbiome actually send chemical signals to our brain about fullness and about what they need to feel healthy. It's almost it's almost like having aliens inside your body. I just find it fascinating.
I love this. As midwives, we're trained in really thinking about how do we optimize wellness, right? And take this approach into all of the care that we provide. That's often what we speak of as a difference between us and other healthcare providers
Yes.
is that mindset, that we bring to pregnancy, menopause, right? Whatever the transition is in life that we're addressing. And so the fact that, you were able to identify this deficit in the knowledge, that was, being shared. And that's an example of you applying that midwife lens, right, to
Yeah, yeah.
in your expertise. And I love that you've already begun to address what was really my next question, which was how has knowledge evolved on this topic throughout your career? I remember one time you presented and you shared examples of how women in your mother's time were advised to smoke cigarettes to maintain their weight
Oh,
in pregnancy.
I have what is almost becoming a relic. When we went through my father's materials, he lived longer than my mother. I found a mimeographed copy of my mother's prenatal diet with me. So we're talking 1952. And the prenatal advice is an egg a day and a glass of milk a day. No beans, avoid beans. And if women were told 9 pounds, that's all you can gain during pregnancy. And the thinking was if you gained more than that, you were making yourself prone to preeclampsia.
Mm.
So if you gained more than that, you could smoke cigarettes to crush your appetite. Outside of pregnancy, women were prescribed amphetamines to control their appetite. It's such different times.
Mm.
And we know now that uh, certainly restricting calories in pregnancy below what's needed for the fetus to grow is not good for anybody, not the fetus, not the pregnant person. Um, one of one of the things that I've lived through that's food as medicine is in the 1990s, we discovered that spina bifida, failure of the spinal cord to close over the nerves, and anencephaly, failure of the skull to close over the brain, was actually caused by a lack of folic acid for many people. So the United States government followed England and Ireland, and in 1998 mandated that all food products, cereal products, breakfast cereals, breads, pasta, be fortified with folic acid. The first year, there was a 50% drop in the incidence of spina bifida. That was so dramatic. And it kind of followed. Years ago, we didn't know that not having enough iodine in our diets caused goiter, and children were born that hadn't had sufficient iodine and their brains didn't develop properly. They were restricted for life, growth restricted, intellectually restricted. We learn to add iodine to food. So I just think that what we eat is so important. My students say to me, though, that puts so much pressure on pregnant people. Well, we're lucky that we are in countries where most people have the vitamin and mineral intake that we need. When I was a new midwife, I came to Florida because there were such dire healthcare needs. And there was actually protein malnutrition in Mississippi and Alabama in the early 80s when I came to the South. And there were many people with anemia. Um, I we don't see anemia that often anymore because we are supplementing our foods and we're using prenatal vitamins. When there's iron deficiency anemia, we're really looking at the cause. Um,
Yeah.
so all that keeps me interested in the topics.
It's funny that you say that students say it puts so much pressure on the individual, because what I think you gave is examples of how policy can impact us at the very individual level, and the importance of that. But that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
So I thought we kind of take it to really, what do pregnant people need to know about this, topic? Does how much weight they gain matter? Does what they eat matter? I mean, we can't talk about everything, but the nuts and bolts, right? Like what's the basics of this?
I think what's surprising for many people is how little extra you need in pregnancy to have the baby grow well. Um, it comes down to about 300 calories a day. Nobody counts calories anymore, but um, that's that's my mother's egg in a glass of milk. It's kind of a sandwich that you would make at home with two slices of bread. Um, I'll come back to whole grains, but even a peanut butter sandwich. That's all you need extra for day. This old saying of you're eating for two keeps coming back. And it was really meant to be think about what you're eating because you want calcium and you want protein for the baby, but it's not two extra adult servings a day, which is what a lot of people think. Um, it is important if you overeat during pregnancy, you can actually make yourself prone to a type of diabetes. We call it gestational diabetes or diabetes in pregnancy. And then the advice will be to watch what you eat carefully. Um, there are some easy ways to think about eating rather than thinking about calories. So, years ago, the Department of Agriculture in the United States created this My Plate diet where half of what you eat should be fruits and vegetables. Um, I talk to people about making half of what you're eating fruits and vegetables instead of half of your plate, because a lot of people think about these big American dinner plates and think that that's what they need at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Um, when really, if you're eating fruits and vegetables, and it doesn't have to be half fruits, half vegetables. I'm really not a big fruit eater. I prefer vegetables. Some people prefer fruits. And if half of what you're eating every day are fruits and vegetables, you're probably going to have a real appropriate weight gain during pregnancy. The other thing to think about is making the breadstuffs, the pastas that you're taking in whole grain. So whole wheat breads. have a lot of fiber in them. They actually help you feel more satisfied after a meal. They have the fibers that sometimes aren't digested or slow digestion, so it evens out your blood sugar levels after you're eating. And you don't feel like you need to eat so much or that you need to snack so much. Um, I've been pregnant. I know, like, you feel hungry when you're pregnant. So maybe to divide up meals a little bit, um, to have an apple or maybe a small cup of yogurt in the afternoon, or maybe some uh, chips and a little salsa, or chips and a little guacamole, or a couple crackers with cheese. A small snack that has some calcium. Your salsa or your guacamole have vegetables in them, and they're satisfying.
I find that eating that way also really helps with that nausea and vomiting in the early part of pregnancy,
Oh,
right?
nausea and vomiting. Yeah. So, there many women get concerned because if they're measuring their weight on a scale, they see themselves losing weight. Or they feel like their waistline's getting looser, and they worry. It's very common for people to lose weight in the first 12, maybe 14 weeks of pregnancy. Um, they will gain that back. And most people have reserves. They've got a little adipose tissue to burn, or they will get enough in so that the fetus isn't starving. Actually, uh, extra calories aren't needed for about the first 16 weeks of pregnancy. And we generally have enough vitamin and mineral reserves that if we're not gaining weight, we still have enough for the fetus to grow nicely.
You talked about the plate, the myplate.gov, and I don't know if our pregnant patients right now remember the pyramid, right? Because that was the nutritional guidance of a past generation at this point. And
Yeah.
that food pyramid on the bottom of it was all about starches and grains. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't really feel like the idea of whole grains was pushed so much back then. It was like
Yeah.
rice, pasta, bread, was the foundation of our diet. And although the guidance has changed, I don't believe that in general the practice, or sort of what you're seeing in actual practice, has changed very much. People have still been very accustomed to eating a lot of starches, and
Mm-hmm.
and not very much of it whole grain. And so I love that you are pointing out this shift in the recommendations, because part of what we also talk about is how much fiber is in the standard American diet versus what
Mm-hmm.
is recommended. And generally speaking, the standard American diet has half of the fiber needs and intake that the recommendation of about 25 grams of fiber. But once we start to eat whole foods with skin on them, we feed that good gut bacteria that we
Yeah.
need,
Yeah.
and help ourselves to feel to feel better. Yeah.
Well, we don't want to sound like carbohydrates are evil,
Right.
because they're the fuel we need. Um, and they're inexpensive compared to protein foods and fruits and vegetables, and they've got long shelf lives, right? But I mean, when you go into most American grocery stores now, you can find whole grain breads, whole grain pastas. So, your spaghettis, your noodles, you can find um, whole grain rices without being wild rice, which has the hull on it and is expensive. You can work whole grains into a diet, I think, pretty easily.
You've talked a little bit about specific nutrients that a pregnant
Hmm.
person should focus on. Many pregnant people become anemic. And so you talked about iron as one specific nutrient. What
Yeah.
are some of the other nutrients and examples of foods that could help people meet what they need?
So the fetus will take nutrients from the pregnant person to meet its own needs, particularly iron and calcium. So, our easiest sources of calcium are dairy products. Um, Eggs have calcium in them, but not to the degree that dairy products do. Um, One of the things that's confusing for people are these changes in advice that come out from the government. So I think the latest saying was everybody should be drinking whole milk. Well, it's important to know that 2% milk and skim milk have the vitamins and minerals that are needed during pregnancy, but not the extra fat. So if individuals are a little bit worried about weight gain, skim or 2% milk will meet their calcium and protein needs. Um, Calcium helps the pregnant person have enough for their own bone health. And it's so important during breastfeeding too, because the postpartum person is putting their own calcium into breast milk. Um, so if people aren't lactose tolerant, which many pregnant people and postpartum people aren't, there are dairy products that have the lactose, that's the milk sugar, removed from them so that they're better tolerated, or they might use calcium supplements. They come generally in 500 milligram tablets, which are pretty big. Um, and two of those a day, 1,000 milligrams, will help meet calcium needs. Um, the other beauty of dairy products is that most of them are also vitamin D fortified. And vitamin D is what helps us absorb calcium. So if you're using calcium supplements, then my advice would also be to use some vitamin D supplements. And they're real tiny and easy to take. Um,
Many of the non-dairy milks are also fortified, right? So
yes,
so if you're
yes.
using almond milk or, something like that, then they're
Hmm.
often fortified as well. And then some people who are lactose intolerant are still able to tolerate yogurt
Yes,
which is, great for our gut bacteria as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard to change our eating practices. And we used to say, well, people eat what they were raised on. And there is truth to that. But what we don't hear enough, I think, is that there are aromatic esters in the foods we eat. So the flavorings, um, and the ones that, kind of hit us in the head are garlic, onions, oregano. We are actually exposed to those while we're in the womb. They circulate in the pregnant person's blood. So we are primed before we're ever born to like certain flavors. And then those aromatic esters go into breast milk, and we're further primed to eat what our family eats. So changing our pre-programmed appetite and taste is really tough. And then we have this aspect of how we use foods to celebrate. Family celebrations, holidays, and in religions. So years ago, when I was seeing patients, people would come to me and say, oh, the Christmas holidays are coming. I'm going to be with my mother-in-law and my mother, and they're going to push me to eat this and double servings. Um, so I would try to help them with strategies to say, look I'm eating this and I'll have a little bit of this cake, but I don't need 2 pieces of it. Or, I'll have a little bit and then wrap some up for me to take home, and then they could eat it at their own pace. Um, you know, we we're not only feeding ourselves, we are surrounded by people who are eating, and we need to negotiate that in pregnancy too.
Yeah, and still be able to experience joy, right? We don't want to feel like we're
Yes,
depriving
yes.
ourselves of anything. Like, you know, pregnancy should be a very joyful time for, for us and for our families. And so, have that baby shower and go to that Christmas party, but, have the strategies in place to be able to help you do so, in a way and that you can taste the foods and not be uncomfortably overindulged.
It is Girl Scout cookie time. I would never tell a pregnant person to avoid Girl Scout cookies. Now, don't eat a whole sleeve of Thin Mints in one sitting, but
I thought that was a serving.
I know. But yeah, we need to celebrate with food. We can't restrict that.
And this is important, right? You've given some examples of why it's important, and if we gain too much, we might develop gestational diabetes, which can be a bit of a pain. Are there any other pregnancy outcomes that people should be concerned about?
Well, once again, this sounds like a lot of responsibility for the pregnant person. But in my book, pregnancy is about the most responsible thing a person can do in this life, and then raising children. What a person eats during pregnancy builds their health. It builds the health of the baby inside the womb. But if that baby is a female, that baby has all of the eggs they will have for the rest of their life. This just kind of blows my mind when I think about it. And if the pregnant person is gaining too much weight, it actually flips genetic switches in the eggs of that female baby and primes that second generation or third generation, depending on how you mark it, to be overweight and have a risk toward diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease as they grow. There was a brilliant physician, an epidemiologist in England during the 1970s and 1980s, David Barker. And I really love him because he noticed that women who had starved during World War II, their children were at risk for diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease as adults. The ones who had adequate nutrition had healthier children who became healthier adults. And David Barker took midwifery records from England. The English, they have been record keepers since they could write. The midwives kept records about people's weight gain. They weighed placentas. They measured the umbilical cords after the babies were born. They had all of these records. And then, because England had the National Health Service and had everybody's lifelong medical records, he linked handwritten birth logs that were stored in old dusty boxes with adult health records from the 70s and 80s and said, what happens in pregnancy with nutrition and weight gain affects that child throughout its life. I mean, there's another example of science that just knocks me out. So that's called various names, the Barker hypothesis or the fetal origins disease. Um, we can give our children and grandchildren the gift of health for decades to come. The Indigenous people in Canada talk about what we do now affecting 7 generations forward. And really, they're not wrong. They kind of knew fetal origins before uh, we did a scientific analysis of it.
I love that. Really, just the idea of leaning into indigenous knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for so very long, we have focused so much on this sort of scientific acquisition of knowledge and uplifting that only. And
Mm-hmm.
really, people since the beginning of time have been figuring things out and communicating that in different ways. And it still really blows my mind to think that I was inside of my maternal grandmother. Like
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
that close is so powerful to think about, that connection that you have with that individual. I think is just really really beautiful, and it's really such an honor and a blessing to think about how tightly connected we are across generations. It's
Mm-hmm.
like the foundation of our humanity. So what, two things that I like to do is give people the tools that they need in order to advocate for themselves and to have the knowledge to take care of themselves. And so I wanted to start with thinking about what are ways that bias might show up related to this topic in an individual's healthcare, and how
Yeah,
might people just, be more aware and alert for that.
yeah. Um, Jessica's heard me talk before, and most often I'm talking the way doctors and scientists talk about nutrition and weight gain in pregnancy, because I'm kind of rooted in that literature. There is a beautiful body of literature that some other midwives actually specialize in, and that is about the stigma of having extra adipose, or some people just want to say, tell it like it is. I've got some extra fat on me, being overweight. And there is real bias in healthcare against people. And part of that is our own fear as healthcare providers. We want everybody to have fabulous outcomes. And we're scared if people gain too much during pregnancy, they have gestational diabetes, and then they have hypertension at the end of pregnancy. We're worried. Will something happen to the baby inside? And will it look like we're responsible for that? And we get caught up in all of these risk statistics, and we lose the individual in the middle. Most pregnant people who are overweight, even if they have a lot of extra weight at the start of pregnancy, have healthy outcomes. And that's because there's this subtle interaction between our weight, our diet, and our age. Most pregnant people are still young enough that the side effects of having extra weight haven't interacted with their age yet to push them toward diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. But providers they're always thinking worst case scenario, which is great. That protects us, but it sounds pretty disrespectful. Um, so I want to reassure our listeners that no matter what weight you start a pregnancy at, you can search out healthy eating and actually help keep yourself healthy during pregnancy. And sometimes we have to love ourselves and kind of ignore what people who are ignorant about holistic health say to us. It kind of broke my heart one day. A student came to me a couple of years ago and said, I was helping a woman in labor last night, and she tried and tried and tried and just couldn't get the baby pushed out. And the physician came in the room, and she was tired. It was 2 a.m. And she said, "You ate yourself into this cesarean section." That's so totally disrespectful. But there are unknowledgeable healthcare providers, assistants, nurses, physicians, midwives who may say things like that. And I, you know, if you have the strength to say, wait a minute, that really hurt me or that insulted me, by all means, do that. People don't learn to change their behavior unless they hear how it affects people.
Yeah, that really takes strength, for sure. And,
Yeah, yeah,
but you're right. It's that level of feedback and letting people know what's not okay, that
yeah,
begin to shift culture. And that is, one of the things that I educate our midwives and nurses about is how they respond when they hear things like that. And how that can impact, our workplaces in creating more
hmm
respectful workplaces. So I wanted to end with your favorite resources to share with patients, because you've really put a lot of energy and effort into, creating open access resources for people.
Well, there there are so many resources. I can't even keep up with them. So now here we have another podcast for people to listen to. I have a daughter who's 38 who just had a baby the end of last year. And, she is forever in podcasts and different online platforms. Um, I I really don't have a favorite resource for people because there's so much out there. What I would say to people is look at those resources and then check with your prenatal care provider. There's a lot of, I'm just going to say, there's a lot of trashy information out there. There's a lot of fad food thinking and kind of heartbreaking. The nutrition information that's coming out of the US federal government now, we all just have to take a pause and I think pretty much ignore for a while. The old simple advice, lean into fruits and vegetables, whole grain foods. And if you're not a meat eater, um, balance the beans and peas and the whole grains so that you're getting all of the amino acids that you need. Um, I do have a website that kind of breaks my heart. I need to update it, and I'm going to do that this fall when I'm on study leave. It's advantagemidwifery.com. I do have some resources in there for pregnant people, for clinicians. I started it to educate midwives and other prenatal care providers about nutrition and pregnancy. Um, there, uh, there is a website. Now I can't remember the name of it, but it's in Advantage Midwifery for people who are questioning their weight gain in pregnancy. Um, yeah.
Excellent. I think that a continuity of care with a provider, a midwife that you trust, can go such a long way in developing that relationship, creating a safe space for you, and decreasing your stress, which is a big cause of inflammation. And so this is part of why we're here, is to talk about the expertise of midwives and to think about how we can help you to impact your health. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. You deserve care that listens to you, respects you, and includes you in every decision about your body. If something in today's episode resonated with you, I encourage you to write it down, talk about it with someone you trust, or bring it with you to your next healthcare visit. Information is powerful, but using it is where change begins. If you found this episode helpful, you can follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Sharing this episode helps more people learn about their options and what respectful maternity care can look like. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Take good care of yourself, and I'll meet you back here next time. Discover Midwives was brought to you by the American College of Nurse Midwives. To find a midwife in your community, go to midwife.org.